Recording has begun. We'll just wait another 2 minutes or so for the rest of the attendees to join. Well, we've got 2 New York City chocolate peanut butter fans here. Must be something in the water.
Registration.
Wow. Okay, cool. We're getting a few more folks joining. Check my email to make sure there's no issues with folks getting in. Cool. Could be good to go. Give it one final minute. Lauren, is this our 4th or 5th AMA at this point?
I think it's our 5th. Let's say.
Amazing. Has anyone in the audience been to all of them so far, or at least 3? Do we have any repeat joiners? Nice. Well, Melissa, Kaylin, all get a free ice cream. No, I'm just kidding. But that would be fun.
On them. They can buy their ice cream.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Looks like we are just on time here, so we'll get going. Thank you for all coming, and hope you're excited to hear from Mithila. She is an incredible research leader at Stack Overflow. We're going to hear a lot about her story, starting with an introduction, her path into research, what it was like joining Stack Overflow as a research team of 1, and how she's built the entire research function over there, essentially from the ground up, and how she's built it into a strategic function. The goal of desire of every researcher is to align research to business goals. And that's something Mithila has a lot of experience with and has thought a lot about. So we're going to talk through that, some research ops topics as well, how it fits into the general function, and about her vision for research ops and research as different disciplines within organizations. Before passing it off, just an introduction on myself. I'm Oren, one of the co-founders here at Rally. We are building a user research CRM to make it easier for teams to recruit their users and manage their participants for all types of research studies. So if you're interested in learning more, feel free to reach out. But without further ado, Mithila, if you would like to give a quick introduction on yourself and your path into research.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So for me, I'll go way back when I was thinking about what to do at university. I was kind of stuck between psychology and computer science, and I thought I'll just do both and probably drop one after a year. And in that time, I found out about this wonderful overlap that is user experience and user experience research. And I just thought, well, this is exactly what I'm interested in. So I was lucky in that it's pretty much always been what I've been interested in, and I've always had a clear path in that sense. So since then, I've spent maybe the last decade around that working in research in Australia, London, Amsterdam, all over the place, at startups, tech companies, Fortune 500 companies, in a bunch of different industries. So, everything from kind of like health to beauty to private aviation, some weird ones in there. And I think what's been really consistent is, like everyone needs research. It's becoming, more and more prevalent, and the kind of the need for it has been more understood. So I feel like the work's gotten more and more interesting over time, which is amazing.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Not only a variety of different geographies, but different industries. Any, I guess, major differences to call out on your experience doing research in English-speaking countries, non-English-speaking countries, Europe, Australia? Anything interesting to call out from that standpoint?
I feel like obviously when you're running research, there's always, you have to be mindful of those cultural differences. But I think broadly, like so much of it is really the same. You often see job ads that require experience in a certain industry or another one. And I think for some niche roles, that is really important, where, maybe a safety critical context is really important. But for a lot of what we do, I feel like so much of our jobs is about understanding our users, and we can do that in any field and in any kind of geography as well.
Yeah, it almost makes research one of the most versatile type of roles that's out there. If you're in B2B software sales, you're probably going to stay in B2B software sales, but if you're in research, you can go into so many different types of companies, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, let's go back a little bit to the beginning of your time at Stack Overflow. What was the lay of the land there like when you were joining, not only with the research team, but maybe the UX maturity in general at the company? And then we can talk about kind of that evolution. What were the first things that you did to start increasing the maturity there?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I joined Stack Overflow about 4 years ago. And there was maybe like one other researcher there at the time. And there was some groundwork that had been done, we were hiring a second researcher. So I think that already speaks volumes. But there was kind of, an understanding that we needed to offer incentives to get quality research done. There was an understanding or an interest in research rather, but the impact that research could have wasn't really very well understood yet. So I really wanted to start growing the maturity of that function and really reposition us from kind of like consultants almost to being seen as really key strategic partners that could help impact not just design decisions, but help shape roadmaps and really help shape what we build going forward. So that meant prioritizing different types of research than what had been done before and focusing on answering kind of those really big picture unknowns. So that is what a lot of kind of like the early days for like myself and some of the researchers who joined shortly after me entailed, like just being very strategic, tackling those big picture questions. And thankfully, I think through doing that, through surfacing insight that could be really used to unlock big business decisions, that got us great support from leadership. And so I think that's something that's really helped us reinforce the value of research from top down. Like our chief product officer is a big advocate of research, and I think that has a really great effect within our org generally. So through that, we were able to really like prove the value of research and what we could bring to the table and show how we could shape strategy and shape the future of the company. And that got us buy-in to really, buckle down, do more research and grow the team a lot.
That's fantastic. And what were some of those maybe early conversations like with leaders across the business, stakeholders about the value of research and maybe those that hadn't seen it quite yet? How was that? How were some of those earlier conversations, and how did you help them change their thinking around it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because our field is relatively new in some senses. A lot of people have different ideas about exactly what it is and exactly what we can do. And so, we're all researchers, and I think a great place to start is like listening both to kind of their interpretation of why we're there, but also thinking about, what are the business goals and what are the things that they care about. So I feel like in the early days, it was more listening on my part, seeing what they care about, what we can impact, and then really, it's very kind of proof in the pudding sort of thing, right? Like once you understand what someone cares about and where you can demonstrate impact, we went straight to kind of like proving value. I think from there, it's much easier to have those conversations to say, hey, look, I know you're interested in this topic and here's what we found on it. and here's the decisions it's going to unlock for you. That becomes a much more productive conversation. And I think most leaders who are interested in, data-backed decision making, interested in their audience and growing the business are going to pay attention when you bring something like that to the table.
Yeah, no, that's great. Very cool. So going into kind of aligning yourself and the research function over there with the business goals, how you already pointed to, sitting down with the stakeholders and trying to understand what their goals are in the first place. But if you can get tactical on that piece, how have you worked to align those two things, and any specific stories as well? People love hearing stories from folks' experiences.
For sure, definitely. So I think, like, as I mentioned, I think listening is a key part. So understanding those business goals, but also making sure like the entirety of kind of your research org or your collaborators really understand, right? Getting that alignment, I think, is critical. So you're all working towards the same goal. I think, balancing those business goals with user impact is really interesting as well, right? And that looks different company to company. Here at Stack, I feel like for us, it's so critical that we consider the impact to our users first, because we're a community product. And if we are not delivering value for users, we won't end up delivering value for our clients, for the business at all. So I feel like that's really got to come first for us. I feel like in most orgs that really does have to come first. So that's kind of like the trade-off I feel like that we're always having to make, right? It's balancing those user goals with business goals. But understanding both I feel like is key. And I think we also have like the option as researchers to kind of go back and put pressure on those business goals and the KPIs we're measuring or whatever it is, and really advocate for a more user-centric approach to goal setting and strategy. So I feel like that's something that we've done, I feel like, at Stack. Like we've really made sure that the voice of our users is understood, and we have plenty of goals that are centered around bringing value to our users.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on that point, any tactics or things that you were able to do to bridge that gap between the users and the stakeholders in the organization? We hear a lot, especially as companies grow, that people feel more and more disconnected from the user, and obviously researchers are that core connector. So how have you been able to bridge that gap between the voice of the user and stakeholders?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think at Stack Overflow, it's an interesting one because we have such a wide audience, and we have a very active power user community who are very happy to share their opinions, who are very engaged in research, and so a lot of the time we can hear a disproportionate amount from that audience. So a lot of our job is really balancing things up and kind of like being that voice. So I think at Stack Overflow, it's a little bit different. Like everyone's kind of paying attention anyway, and we're there as like a filter. And we partner with our community management team as well, who has a really interesting like pulse on kind of sentiments within the community. At past companies, though, that's not always been the case, right? Like we really saw that distance. So I think, ways we've tackled that, I think you have like the obvious things around like, how to, about bringing stakeholders potentially into research sessions. And that's sometimes possible, sometimes not, doing things like highlights reels of findings. But I think like just getting creative with how we present research is really critical, bringing that awareness. Like, when I worked in a physical office, we do things like print out posters with, information about different segments or key research findings and like pop them up around the room to make sure people really like were thinking about it all the time. But yeah, I think there's just so many different ways to like tackle that awareness. But I think being the squeaky wheel about it a little and bringing it up a lot also goes a long way. Yeah.
Always have to shout from the rooftops, depending on the environment. Awesome. So we have a few questions that came in from the chat that are quite relevant here. So from SL here, maybe if you can talk through some of the challenges for either yourself or the researchers in your team, having worked with product managers specifically, and maybe any ways you've built better relationships with product managers or even design counterparts as well, while we're on the topic.
Yeah, well, I feel like PM and design are probably our most natural collaborators as researchers. And so broadly, I found this always to be a really productive relationship. I think where sometimes things can get blurry, like especially, if a PM or designer hasn't worked with research before, is really those boundaries between our roles, and I think in a lot of companies, product managers will kind of unilaterally own product strategy. And I think when a researcher's in the mix, it's really nice for that to be more of a collaboration, So I think some of the things we've done to foster a better relationship are, really bringing product managers and designers into our planning processes, getting that alignment early, making sure that we're all working towards a common goal, making sure that we're answering the questions that they have, aligning on future direction. I think that alignment piece is so critical. And then also, like, just within the org generally, having kind of a clearer delineation between, what's in the remit of a researcher versus a designer versus a product manager. At Stack Overflow, I feel like, we definitely lean towards hiring specialists rather than generalists. And so I feel like that makes that a little bit easier, right? Like, we have expertise in research and they have expertise in design or PM. So that makes it a little easier to kind of draw those boundaries as well.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And yeah, that's definitely the dream of being able to own the product roadmap and direction. So awesome advice on how to get there. Another couple questions here. So from Michelle, have you ever had any difficulty connecting with key stakeholders in leadership about research? And if so, how did you navigate elevating research with them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I've definitely been in that situation in the past, I think often, like I mentioned earlier, you'll often see advice about like just bringing your stakeholders into a research session and that being like a great tool. But obviously there's that's probably only doable with like your more immediate collaborators. There's just a tier of leadership that doesn't have the time or space to get involved in that way. So I feel like in the past I've had to be more strategic about it, thinking about who else can advocate for research. Like I think this is like a particular issue for solo researchers or smaller teams within bigger orgs. So thinking about who else can advocate for you and how you can build those relationships. Think about the impact you can have for other people in the business and to grow your impact in that way. I think also there's an element of kind of advocating for proper leadership for research. I think getting your org a seat at the table is really important as well. Making sure you have good representatives. And if it's not another researcher, then how can you best help your kind of like whoever you report to, whatever function you report to, understand the value of what you're bringing to the table and get them to really be a voice for research as well.
Yeah, I love that. Not a simple task, depending on the organization you're in, but sounds like some great advice. Another question here from Carol, back on kind of the PM partnerships. How do you think about prioritizing some of the more tactical and immediate questions of your stakeholders working on today's roadmap and today's problem versus taking a step back and thinking about those bigger, meatier strategic questions?
This is a great question. I actually think this might be a question in our interview process, so it's that good a question. But I feel like that's it's always a balance, right? And I think there's big variation team to team here. So I think obviously if you're newer to a team, you'll want to sit down and maybe like listen and ingest more of what's going on and think about maybe okay, while you're working on those tactical short-term pieces, how can you bring in some of the longer-term questions and start building that knowledge base over time? If you're on this team and you're kind of stuck in this loop, I think that kind of needs to be like a discussion about like what can you maybe make your best guesses on in the short term and really understand some of those big picture questions. Taking a step back and really building up a wealth of foundational knowledge and research can be so valuable and shortcut so many studies in the future. So I feel like it's got to be seen as that sort of investment, just the same as when you're building something like, at some point you have to tackle the tech debt. And I feel like we have that same kind of same thing on the research side, right? Like it gets to a point where the unknowns are too risky and you need to step back and really answer them.
Yeah. That's super helpful on that kind of transition period on working on a little bit of both at once before taking on the other responsibilities. Awesome. Another question from Maria here on the note of clarifying roles and responsibilities. The age-old question, do you think research functions best within product, design, standalone, something else? And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm an advocate for it being standalone. I don't think it nests under design or product. I think they are close collaborators, but I think it's a meaningfully different function with a meaningfully different purpose. So that's where I stand. I think that's, of course, not the way it works in many orgs. And I think, we have to work within different situations. But I feel like working towards a standalone research function should be the goal, and that's the best opportunity we have to grow maturity. When that happened at Stack Overflow, we were able to form a research guild and really grow the maturity of our research function. And if I think about what our research function looks like today versus even 2 years ago, it's really meaningfully different. So I think it's been really good for us.
I love that. For those not familiar with the term guild, do you want to clarify, tell us a little bit more about what this research guild looks like over there at Stack?
For sure. I mean, to be fair, I feel like this means different things at so many different companies, but at Stack Overflow, what it means is we our guild comprises all the researchers from across all the different product lines in the company. So it's a place for us to come together. And obviously for us to kind of like support each other and give each other feedback and improve kind of the quality of our research over time, but also a place for us to work on things like our research ops, our processes, just growing our UX maturity. So it's kind of all that stuff that's like slightly adjacent to like actually doing research, but no less important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I'm sure it makes people feel more part of something greater, less, on their little islands that sometimes can form when researchers are embedded in different teams.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Cool. A few questions here from one from Michelle on any strategies for joining a team that's under design and pulling it out from under design / product and making it into a standalone function. I'm sure this is something a lot of folks are in the reality of sitting under one of those groups.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. And, I feel like I've had some successes in the past with this and some places where that just wasn't going to happen, right? But I think I'll go back to like my earlier comments about thinking about, the more immediate people you can impact with your research and thinking about, okay, well, if you want to influence a certain person, then how can you show them the value of research? How can you show them that it's meaningfully different from design? So understand their needs, understand their big questions about your product, and think about how you can show impact there. I think there's probably also an element of being a bit firm about the value that research brings. I think, I see a lot online about this kind of very softly approach where we, kind of bring everyone into the mix and democratize early and all this other stuff. And I think, there's benefits to that at certain companies, but I think there's got to be an element of just putting our foot down a little and saying, no, like so many researchers are massively qualified. Like a lot of us have backgrounds in social science research, formal qualifications. Like we're not just people who kind of were a little bit curious about what other people thought and started asking questions. So I think having our expertise be understood and respected is really critical. So yeah, I think the biggest thing where I've had success with this in the past is having more senior people advocate on behalf of this as well. So it wasn't just me. You got to get other people in the mix, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. All starts with the advocacy and showing people what they don't know, because people don't really know what a researcher is and how they're trained and what value they can bring. Yeah. Awesome. We have a lot of questions coming in, so I'll try to get to each of them. But Sarah over here is asking, if you could go back to when you started at Stack, what would you not do again? Did you try anything that did not have the impact that you expected?
I think that's an interesting one. I mean, I have to say, like, my time at Stack's gone pretty smoothly, especially in those early years. Like, I think, all of my collaborators were so interested in research, from the get-go. But I'll reflect on this, like, at other companies I've been at, and I think, especially earlier in my career, I would spend a lot of time kind of listening to kind of like whims and chasing research projects that maybe weren't as aligned to like the overall mission or goals of the company. And I feel like that's something that earlier in my career I did a lot of, and I think I wouldn't ever do again. I think someone might say, oh, it'd be really interesting to find out this, and you go, yeah, it would be interesting, and go research. And I think that's it's a common pitfall that I feel like I see amongst researchers, and one that we should really try and avoid. Like, try and keep our research on track, forward-looking, focused. I think that's really critical.
Mm-hmm. Love it. One quick clarification from Megan here. How big is the research team at Stack now?
I think we're about 11 or 12 people, I think.
Nice.
Doing some slow math in my head there, but yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool. And just to go back to an earlier question from Kaylin over here, at what point did research ops emerge as a separate / needed function while growing the team? How is that structured? How was it structured then versus now? So I guess, yeah, just tell us a little bit about research ops and that the evolution of that topic at Stack.
Absolutely. I think the need for research ops really became most apparent when we started the guild that I was talking about. I think that is when we saw, how much duplication of efforts we were all making, how much time could be saved by, having more consistent, consolidated research ops processes. We're definitely at the point now where we really need a research ops person. We don't have one currently, but that will be our next hire. I think we really want someone to come in and think about not only those like day-to-day tactical operations, but also tackle some of our more strategic research ops pieces around, things like how do we improve our response rates to surveys, and how do we improve kind of the diversity of our samples. So yeah, it's well needed, I think, at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great to hear. And yeah, going back to the guild, Tatiana up there was asking about what are some of the ceremonies and rituals that you have as a research guild? What types of meetings, cadence, anything else worth sharing about the ways that you all collaborate?
Mm-hmm. So we have a few different ways we collaborate. So we meet every 2 weeks, and those meetings will either be kind of like a general meeting where we can bring topics to the table that are related to like our goals that we're working on as a guild. So, some example projects that we've had in the past as a guild have been things like, helping non-researchers run research and really thinking about what boundaries and guardrails do we want to put in place there, what information do we want to provide, defining that process. So we might meet to chat about goals related to the project we're working on, or anything else that's relevant to kind of like the researchers as a group. The other type of meeting we have is we call them like work shares or demo meetings. And so that's obviously a place to kind of share research you've done, talk us through methodologies you've used. Was there anything new that you tried, different recruitment methods, different, whatever. And also to bring in progress work and get feedback as a group. So I feel like it's a great venue for that as well. We have retros every quarter to reflect on how it's been going as a guild in general, and how the role as a researcher has been within the company. We have a Slack channel, like a private Slack channel just for us, and I feel like it's one of our more used Slack channels. I think we have great discussion. I feel like we're very lucky in that all of our researchers are super engaged, and it makes for like a better space, in general. The guild is a really interesting, engaged space where everyone's motivated to improve research ops, improve the maturity of our research org, and always happy to give each other feedback. So I feel like that kind of like, putting in the effort to like bond and share and whatever else, it absolutely pays off.
Yeah, it sounds like super actionable advice that anyone who's trying to do the same can build. Very cool. Another question here from Ashley. So I guess you had touched on this a little bit in a few different points, but democratization is obviously a hot topic, to say the least, within research. And you pointed at potentially not doing it too early, even though might be like an easier way to bring research into an org, but then bringing it at a certain point. Ashley's question here is about undoing previous democratization efforts. She joined the company as the first and only researcher, but all her stakeholders have already been leading their own research projects, and it's getting a little difficult trying to figure out how to rein everyone in. Any general advice on this topic?
Yeah, I think taking that step back is definitely more difficult than doing it, from the start. But some things that we've used to really kind of like wrangle things at Stack Overflow is we've tried to be very clear about the types of research projects that are appropriate for a researcher to take on versus those that aren't, and, you can balance that up in a lot of different ways, like splitting it between generative and evaluative research, thinking about dividing it up by sample size, with the audience of the research, or where the research is going to be used, or the decisions it's going to make. So I feel like wherever you draw that line at your company, it's important to still draw that line. Another thing we did, we leverage frameworks that are out there. So we created like a whole RACI situation. So thinking about, who's responsible, accountable, for different pieces of it. And that's a great point, I feel, that you can align with stakeholders on. So if you're trying to rein it back in, then take a pass at, figuring that out and make that a discussion, like see whether your stakeholders agree with that kind of division of work and accountability, and see whether you can go from there. And so, we also have to have very clear processes for kind of like, especially if you're the only researcher, very clear processes for kind of like intaking that work and splitting it between yourself and non-researchers. So I think making your process as clear to others as possible is critical. I feel like when you're in this boat, there's a lot of room for ambiguity. So I think cutting back on that ambiguity where possible is really important.
Love it. Yeah, the more clear the division of labor is, the more success that there will be, for sure. Cool. On that note, Alyssa up here is asking a question about more about research ops. I think you already kind of touched on the fact that you don't have research ops as a dedicated role quite yet, but maybe you can chime in on what you are hoping research ops will unlock over there at Stack, and what are some of the key priorities you want that new hire to tackle?
Well, I think like on the day-to-day, right, like we are very interested in having someone kind of like take a more considered look at our kind of like our everyday recruitment processes, but someone to really like, also have it be top of mind to think about, participant privacy, think about, the use of our findings, thinking about all of those kind of like very, very critical pieces that we do think about now, but I think can really flourish when that is top of mind for someone. I think, as I mentioned, there's also a lot of strategic pieces that I feel a research ops person can bring to the table for us. Like, we work in a space that is predominantly, male dominated. And that's not the only voice we want to hear. So how can we balance that up? How can we bring more neurodiverse users to the table? How can we make sure that our processes are inclusive? So I think there's so many different kind of angles that, an ops person can help us with here. But yeah, that's just a handful of them.
Love it. Yeah, having someone fully focused on things like diversity and inclusion within research sounds like super valuable. Cool. So another question here from Megan on having a separate market research function. Is that a thing over at Stack? And if so, what are some of the things that work well or not so well within that org structure versus having all of research under the same umbrella?
So ours is definitely split out. Like, we haven't always had a distinct market research function. We have at times, but our product marketing org is very research savvy. So they will often contract out market research work. I think it's always been sort of a, we're always interested in each other's results and work that comes out from each of those different groups. But I think we have a very clear delineation of the types of research market research or marketers go after, and the types of research that we do. So I feel like a lot of the research they're thinking about is, market sizing, willingness to pay, kind of those metrics, which we are definitely interested in, but I wouldn't say that's our bread and butter. So I feel like having that distinction has made it quite clear to like divide up work at all times. But that being said, I think like the notion of a comprehensive like insights function is really interesting. I know a lot of companies do this and get a lot of value out of it. At Stack, one thing that we've been talking about and are slowly starting to kind of build up is like an insights guild. So we're going back to this guild word again, and this time it means something a little different even at Stack. But I think the space is meant to be for anyone kind of interested in research. So that could be us, UX researchers, market researchers, our data scientists. I think there's a lot of people who are interested in running various forms of research and bringing that all together. So that's something that we're interested in kind of fostering more of, because I definitely think that there are benefits to bringing everything together, less duplication of work, a more strategic outlook. So yeah, I think that's like the next level of maturity that like we'd love to unlock.
Yeah, no, that sounds, it would be super valuable. And Carol here just asked a question that was pretty spot on of, does your guild include other research teams like market research or data science as well, or focus solely on your UX research team? So sounds like there's a new one that's forming, but that also brings up a good point on data science and the partnership between research and data. All the time people are talking about researchers working with product managers and designers and marketers. But I know data science is also a core partnership. So why don't you talk a little bit more about your relationship with that part of the organization and maybe ways to also continue building that type of partnership?
So at Stack, all of our researchers are mixed methods researchers. And I think the fact that and some of them are more, quantitative focused than others, and, are capable of, very interesting quantitative analyses. And I feel like that's been like a really key building block for us in fostering that relationship with the data team, is seeing that like, hey, we do actually have pretty similar skill sets, very similar interests. So that's been like a real kind of stepping stone towards building a better relationship. I think where Stack is right now and where so many companies are is that people related to data science or data engineering are kind of they have the best outlook on what data we have available to work with. Like I've seen this play out at so many different companies. So they're often kind of like the people who know, like, what behavioral data do we even have? What usage data do we even have to work with? So I feel like that's a great place to start a collaboration, is, you know, really figuring out like what shared resources do we even have, and then going from there. I think it really depends on the model as well, though, of how, you know, how you work. Like as researchers, we're far more embedded in product teams than the data scientists at Stack Overflow. So they have different interests as well. But I think finding that commonality in terms of like skills, interest in data, interest in kind of like answering difficult questions, I feel like those are great places to just start building the relationship.
Perfect. Awesome. There's another couple questions here. One from Michelle on starting as a research team of one, how to convince stakeholders that you're going to prioritize strategic forward-looking questions alongside their more immediate ones. You briefly touched on this before, kind of balancing that short term and long term, but yeah, maybe a little bit more on that piece.
Well, I think think about the strategic questions that your stakeholders are most interested in. I feel like that's what it's got to come down to first, right? I'm sure every stakeholder I've ever worked with has some big question about like how things work in the product, how our users do a certain thing, figure out what the biggest impact is for them. And if you can't get them to agree to like actually carve out some of your research time in a study dedicated to that, we always have the opportunity to just sneak in a question or two at an interview or on a survey. So I feel like you can start slowly building towards that. You know, I feel like it's just a matter of speed. I think there's always the opportunity to do it. I think if you're in an org that won't even let you sneak in a question or two, like I feel like that's a tricky situation, right? Like I know it does happen where there's kind of that like almost micromanagement over what goes in a research plan. And I don't think that is entirely appropriate. I think as researchers, we should have enough autonomy. So I feel like that's where you might want to think about general evangelization of research and go back to that advocacy piece to really think about how you can get that autonomy and start building that knowledge base.
Awesome. Wonderful. Another question here from Maria is on ROI. So another age-old research question. Does your team have a good way of showing the organization the ROI of the research that you're doing?
I think yes and no. I think for us, like a failed study is one that doesn't get used. And so that doesn't mean that it, you know, has to be directly linked to a feature or anything. That could be that we as an org decide to, you know, pivot or sunset a feature or something else. But I think what's critical is we want all our research to be used. And I think that is the most important measure of success for us. So that's one way we look at ROI. I think, you know, as we go forward, we're really looking to improve the reusability of our research results, the accessibility of our research results. There's a lot of different things we're considering. I'd say there's no firm metrics we look at because, you know, it can be a little tricky. We're like a few steps removed from you know, having a direct impact on revenue or a direct impact on kind of usage behaviors. So yeah, but that, I think on that point, like as researchers, we can really think about defining the impact when we're building up research plans or research strategies. And we can also think about really defining the metrics that the research would have an impact on. So I think we can make those links. And that's a really worthwhile discussion. If that's not something you'll do, like have that discussion with your PMs, with you know, whoever it is in your business that has the best oversight of kind of like what your North Star metrics are and the metrics you're trying to impact.
Yeah, I love it. There's no silver bullet necessarily, not one KPI. Great. a few questions. I'm just going to a little out of order here. So Beth, I think it's just asking for some clarification on that. I'm curious to hear a bit more on some of the techniques you use to ensure research is used after the fact. So how are you thinking about driving up that reusability and accessibility piece?
I think the biggest thing that we do to make sure our research is used comes right at the start is alignment. So making sure that like before we even really plan out our research properly, all our stakeholders are aligned on research goals, the key research questions we're trying to answer, and the research impact we want to have. So I feel like if people are aligned up front, they know what's going to come. They can start mentally prepping to use this research. They're waiting on the results. So that's the biggest thing we do. I think the other thing we do is really, we value communication a lot. I think that's really critical. And I always say, I think that's one of like the most underrated but important skills we can have as researchers is being good storytellers. So, figuring out what format, what style your stakeholders care about, what's going to, mean something to them, and delivering research in that way, right? I think that's important. Thinking about reusability and future use of results, I mean, I think this is a problem that we haven't totally solved Stack Overflow. Like we've tried various research repositories, we've tried a lot of things in that vein, and every solution that we've tried has its pitfalls, but something we're actively working towards is making sure that it's not just in the minds of our more tenured researchers, right? That it gets out there and people can really leverage the wealth of research we've been building over the years. So that's something that I don't have like a firm like a best practice on, but we're definitely working towards.
Very cool. Osman, that I think leads into one of the questions here as well from Kaylin about some tools or processes that you're using day to day for recruitment, knowledge management, collaboration. Have any of them been mission critical for scaling the team? Any tools that you're particularly excited about as well?
Well, I'd be remiss not to say we're excited about Rally now. And we are trialing Rally at the moment. And I mean, I think, we do have, we have a very big list of opted-in users for research at Stack Overflow. We have nearly 2 million users who have opted in for research, which is a wonderful thing to have, but also a challenge in that so many user research tools cannot handle that, right? So we often have to use marketing tools. And that's meant a lot of awkward workarounds. There's a very steep barrier to entry for our new researchers learning our tool set that we have to use. So I don't think that there's any one tool that we'd be particularly excited about. I think, some like basic tools that just work really well for us are Calendly, for example. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's critical. I think within the team, we all have different kind of preferences when it comes to things like qualitative coding, stats tools. So I think there's, again, no one tool that really unlocks a lot for us there. We also have our own product, Stack Overflow Teams, which is a knowledge-based tool. And I think, it's like the rest of Stack Overflow is primarily like question and answer based. So that can be a really interesting way as well for us to share research and have it be more reusable. So that's something that we leverage as well.
Awesome. Yeah. The 2 million users is definitely a blessing and a curse, but more a blessing, it sounds like, compared to what other folks have as well. Very cool. So we have another question here from Michelle on getting more perspectives in research. If you have any suggestions for gaining support for diversity and inclusion in research. She mentioned that I find that as a woman, it can be difficult to convince colleagues of this need.
Yeah, for sure. I think with topics like this, it can often be useful to reach out to, like, I guess, non-traditional stakeholders. So does your org have anyone that is more focused on, diversity and inclusion? For example, perhaps within like the people side of your business. Do you have any existing groups? Like at Stack Overflow, we have like a forget the acronym, but we have basically a group for mental illness and neurodiversity, an employee resource group. So that's someone that we turn to, a group that we turn to for feedback as well, and to kind of like get that off the ground. I think also there's the kind of like key business aspects of this, right? Like we want a diverse set of perspectives, because that is more representative of our user base in the end of the day as well, right? So I think if you don't have those partners, you know, in the business that can support you, I think you can also bring it back to kind of some more business goals as well, which is, I think, is a place to start. I do find that like once the ball gets rolling on this sort of topic, and once we can show actionable ways that we can have impact here, I've never had too much pushback, but I think action is key, right? Like I think these are topics we can talk around a lot, but figuring out what in your research process can actually change and advocate for that specific action, that can be really useful.
Love that. Awesome. So not too many more questions in the Q&A. We have a few more minutes here. Maybe we can pivot, just talking a little bit more about future facing, you know, your vision for how research and research ops are going to continue evolving at Stack. You know, you've been there for 4 years now. Where would you like it to be 4 years from now?
Well, that's a great question. I think, you know, I want us to continue growing the maturity of our team. So like I said, I think that eventually I'd love us to be in a place where we're really able to leverage all the different insight that comes in from all different directions, you know, whether that's from us as researchers, market researchers, data scientists, whether it's from our community managers, things that they're noticing in the community. I'd love us to have ways to really like put all that information in one place and see it and make decisions based around it. So I don't know exactly how we'll do that, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. If I think about like the future of research ops at Stack, I think, you know, that's definitely something that, like I said, I would love to have people dedicated to thinking about, and not just make that a responsibility of our guild. I think, you know, we've fostered this fantastic collaborative space within our teams and within our guild. And I think just growing that and keeping that central to how we work will be really important as well. I think that's like what's most top of mind for me. You know, I think there's a lot of just continuing on with what we're doing, you know, continuing to like plan more to, you know, right now, like we build out research roadmaps. So how can we make them more predictable, more kind of forward looking? Yeah, there's all of the kind of like usual aspects, I think, around growing the maturity of any function in the business. You know, we want to improve predictability, improve kind of like our forecasting, improve all of that as well.
Yeah, I love that. Just going more into the world of proactivity as much as possible, as opposed to reactivity. Awesome. We have a few other questions here. So Michelle's asking, any thoughts on AI and research? I've been noodling on it, if it will have a big impact on our work and career paths, or if it will just be a beneficial tool for us to grow as a field. So if you've thought at all about AI, I'm sure the audience would be curious to get your thoughts.
I think this has been a hot topic amongst our researchers. And while I don't have kind of like firm thoughts on it in general, I don't think that it'll be anything other than a beneficial tool for us. You know, I think, you know, looking at some of the tools that are emerging, like that leverage generative AI, I think they seem more like substitutes to help us with things like finding themes and qualitative coding and that sort of thing. I think there's no substitute for having a strategic point of view and good, clear storytelling and communication. So I feel like hopefully it ends up just shortcutting parts of our workflow for us, and we can still, you know, bring that strategic lens to the table.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think just like any tools so far that have helped us to get rid of some of the busy work and more manual parts of the job, more time spent on the strategic work. Wonderful. Any final questions for Mithila? We've got about 3 minutes left. Got a few comments here on AI, summarizing insights. Not always correct, nor does it market itself to be. Yep.
Yeah, that's a big one, right? It was like when AI transcription tools got popular a few years ago. Well, I've heard they've improved a lot. I haven't tried one recently, but I felt like, a few years ago, there was no substitute for just like a proper transcription service. It was not the same. You'd spend so much time correcting your transcripts anyway.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll see how these things continue to progress. Any final words of wisdom for the audience in this last minute or two?
I guess no final words, but I feel like the message that I always come back to, like with my team and with researchers generally, is just to really kind of value what we bring to the table, to really have confidence in our own expertise and why we're there. And I think we can often spend a lot of time justifying and explaining our purpose, and just to not doubt that, and to be kind of firm about it. There's certain things that you just need to, like I said earlier, it's a strange phrase, but put your foot down about. And I think, like not undervaluing ourselves as a function is key to growing the function overall.
Love it. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Mithila. This was super insightful, and clearly a lot of people are thinking about the same things here. So glad we're able to bring the group together, and yeah, excited to see the recap. And thank you again for your time. Lots of emojis flying now. That's how you know the audience loved it.
Well, thank you all. Great questions.
Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. Appreciate the time. These hours always fly by, so can't believe it, but have a great day, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks all.
Alrighty, bye everyone.